Welcome to Darkness Notes Coaches, terrifying secrets, and mysterious stories that will make you tremble. In 1778, 8 children vanished in Kansas. But they weren't taken, they were changed. And what came back wasn't human anymore. Before we begin, understand this. The story you're about to hear was never meant to survive. It was buried. Church floors, under government seals, under layers of medical denial and small-town whispers. But truth doesn't die, it waits. And tonight, it's clawing its way back, in the deep wilds of what is now Harper County, Kansas. Just 2 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, a family quietly disappeared from the public. 6 brothers, 2 sisters, born of the Granger bloodline, their parents Caleb and Miriam Granger, homesteaders of modest means, deeply religious, and known for their strict codes of purity. What happened to them is not found in textbooks. It's not listed in census records. But there are maps, old ones, drawn with shaking hands, and in the margins of those maps are symbols, runes, warnings, and a single word, scratched in ink now faded to brown: unclean. You see, before the Blackwoods, before Cedar Ridge, there was the Granger estate, a plot of land so fertile it defied the Kansas droughts, where the wheat grew taller than men and animals healed from wounds overnight. The settlers called it blessed, but that wasn't blessing, that was bait. The children were seen last in the fall of 1770. days after a strange red light was reported in the sky above the prairie. Some said it was a comet, others whispered it was a signal, a summoning. Whatever it was, it marked a beginning, or an end. For the next 36 days, not a single person left the Granger property, not to trade, not to attend church, not to bury their dead. When a circuit preacher finally rode out to the homestead, he found the farmhouse silent, not abandoned. The livestock stood in their pens, eerily still. The front door hung open, and inside, in that house of prayer and discipline, he found the 8 children, alive, but they were not as they had been. Their skin was pale and almost translucent, like candle wax. Their eyes entirely black, reflecting no light, and their speech, when it came, wasn't English. It wasn't any earthly tongue. The preacher fled. He never returned, but he did leave behind a single entry in his leather-bound journal, now archived in a sealed vault in Topeka. It reads, "I saw no devils, only what comes after God turns his face away." They called it a fever at first, a fever of the soul, not of the flesh, because no science of that time nor of ours could explain what began to unfold across that Kansas prairie. After the preacher's discovery, no lawman would ride to the Granger home, not even the nearest doctor. A Civil War surgeon turned prairie healer dared saddle his horse. They knew something unspeakable had settled in that house, but it didn't stay there. Neighbors, those who lived within a mile, began reporting things. Livestock going missing, yes, but stranger still were the sounds. Low hums in the night, singing, they said, but not with human voices, harmonies that made the air vibrate. One farmer claimed his eldest son began waking at exactly 3:03 a.m. every night, walking outside barefoot in the frost, and whispering toward the Granger property like something was whispering back. When questioned the next morning, the boy remembered nothing, but his eyes were bloodshot, and his feet showed no signs of cold. Soon, children from neighboring farms began falling ill, not with typhoid or influenza, but with something else. Their blood thickened, their skin became mottled, like old paper, and always the eyes darkening, dilating, stretching, until only shadow remained. No one dared call it a plague, but the mothers knew. They'd seen their babies born with holy light in their faces, and now watched that light dim, replaced by something feral. The Granger children, however, grew stronger. Witnesses said the eldest boy, Elias, was seen lifting a full plow alone. His sister Mary, no older than 12, walked barefoot through fields of shattered glass without bleeding. By winter's arrival, they had stopped speaking altogether. Instead, they communicated with looks, with subtle tilts of the head, and when one moved, the others followed, perfectly synchronized, as if one thought controlled all 8 bodies. A local Mennonite pastor, one of the few brave enough to get close stride to intervene. He approached the house with a cross and a bag of salt, but when he stepped onto the threshold, he collapsed. His heart stopped beating for over 2 minutes. When he awoke, he screamed one phrase over and over: "They have no names, they've given them up." He lived only 3 days after that, locked in the church attic, where he clawed scriptures into the wooden floor until his fingers split to the bone. The Granger land was declared cursed in 1780, but even that word cursed is too easy. It implies punishment. This was something else. This was evolution. orchestrated by something ancient, something waiting beneath the soil, and science has been running from it ever since. By the spring of 1781, the Granger family had vanished, not fled, not buried, vanished. The land was found undisturbed. The house still stood. The fields, untouched by wind, rain, or human hand, remained unnaturally golden. Inside the farmhouse, the table was still set with plates of half-eaten food, bread hardened to stone, a spoon dropped mid-scoop, chairs pushed back as if the family had risen in unison. No sign of struggle, no blood, no goodbye, just absence. Except for the basement. It was Miriam Granger's brother, Isaac Warren, who found it. He arrived after months of silence, riding from Missouri with nothing but a family Bible and a shotgun. The neighbors wouldn't go near the property, so Isaac went in alone. He entered the cellar with a lantern. What he saw was recorded in a single page he tore from his Bible, scrawled in soot and blood. They have shed flesh like a garment. What remains is not for man's eyes. Isaac emerged from the house screaming. They say he never spoke again. His hair turned white within hours. He walked into the river 3 days later and drowned himself, his boots tied with barbed wire to his ankles. The page from the Bible was later found nailed to a church door 20 miles away, the ink smeared by dried tears. That was the last official record of the Granger family. Until 1843, 65 years later, a team of railway surveyors stumbled upon the ruins of the Granger home. The house had burned intentionally, it seemed, but the basement remained. What they found inside triggered a federal investigation, quickly classified under the newly formed Bureau of Indian Affairs. Though no tribal presence was ever linked to the land, the team reported artifacts of non-human design, stone etchings with impossible geometry, bones longer, thinner, and cleaner than any human skeleton, and symbols carved into every wall, repeating patterns that pulsed when touched. One man, a Union veteran and field medic named Josiah Grimm, reached out to trace one of the symbols. His fingers began to blister immediately. Within an hour, his skin was sloughing off in strips. Within a day, his blood turned black. Grimm died, raving about voices in the cracks of the dirt, claiming the ground itself was alive and hungry. After his death, the basement was sealed with concrete. A federal order demanded the surrounding 400 acres be left undeveloped. Maps were redrawn, roads were rerouted, and the name Granger was erased from Kansas land deeds permanently. But secrets don't sleep. They seep. And the bloodline didn't end. The Granger bloodline re-emerged in 1865 quietly, like a shadow returning to the corner of a forgotten room. A child was born in Indiana to a woman named Ruth Unsell, a seamstress of no particular note, whose husband had died 3 years earlier in the Civil War. But the boy named Elias, like the vanished Granger son of 1778, was born with a birthmark unlike anything the midwife had seen, a black spiral behind his left ear, warm to the touch, and pulsing faintly in time with his heartbeat. The midwife's notes, later recovered from her private diary, described the infant as unnervingly alert. She claimed he locked eyes with her immediately after birth, without crying, without blinking. She wrote, "It felt as though something older was looking out from behind that child's skin, something that had seen more winters than the earth herself." By the age of 4, Elias could read Latin fluently despite no one in the household speaking it. At 6, he was found carving complex mathematical formulas into the walls of the cellar using a single nail. His mother, terrified and confused, brought in a local pastor to bless the home, but after the blessing, every mirror in the house shattered at once. Elias was found standing in the center of the kitchen, smiling softly, whispering the same phrase over and over, "The light has no voice here." By 12, Elias had gathered 6 other children from the outskirts of town. Outcasts, orphans, the unusually gifted. Together they built a small structure in the woods, nothing grand, but eerily symmetrical, formed with care that surpassed their age. A single room with 7 chairs arranged in a circle. Locals called it the listening place. Then the dreams began. Adults across the town started waking at precisely 3:03 a.m., the exact time the preacher claimed to hear God turn his back, with bleeding ears and images burned into their minds. Circles of fire, roots growing from mouths, children levitating above cracked soil. A physician, sent from Fort Wayne to investigate mass hysteria, conducted neurological tests on 3 of the children. His report was confiscated by the army within days, but his last known letter, sent to his brother before his disappearance, ended with one cryptic line: "These are not children, they are copies, flawless, flesh-made, echoes of something that does not belong to us." The structure was burned down by frightened locals in 1870. but the children were never seen again. No remains, no smoke damage in the trees, no explanation. And then, 8 years later, 1878, a Blackwood brothers appeared in Kansas. All 4 born of women who never survived childbirth. All 4 adopted under circumstances sealed by court order. All 4 bearing the Granger mark. The Blackwood brothers didn't just settle the land, they claimed it, as if they had always known it was waiting for them. Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel, 4 men who looked more like iterations of the same idea than brothers, tall, symmetrical, black-bearded, pale-eyed, but it wasn't their appearance that unnerved the townspeople, it was how the land responded to them. The moment they broke ground on their chapel, the wheat grew thicker, wild animals approached without fear. A well, dug by Ezra alone, no divining rod, no surveying hit, the clearest, coldest water anyone had ever tasted. They said he dreamed its location, and when he hammered the final stone into the chapel wall, the temperature on the farm dropped by exactly 4 degrees, and stayed that way, permanently. Cattle brought to the Blackwood farm fattened twice as fast and never got sick. Fruit trees that shouldn't grow in Kansas, soil figs, pomegranates, even citrus flourished in the back grove. No one could explain it, but the brothers offered no explanation. They just smiled and said, "Faith rewards those who obey." But there was no laughter on that farm, no courting, no music, no friends, just scripture, labor, and silence. A silence that thickened after sundown. Locals who wandered too close to the property after dark swore they heard and harmonic, like stone grinding on stone. One woman claimed she saw the brothers walking the edge of their fields barefoot, hands raised to the sky, mouths moving in perfect unison though no sound escaped. She described their eyes as reflective, like glass under moonlight but with no soul behind them. The town doctor, Morrison, began keeping notes on the Blackwoods after treating a ranch hand who briefly worked their harvest. The man came to him with severe migraines, tremors, and spontaneous nosebleeds. But what frightened the doctor most wasn't the symptoms, it was the things the man said in his fevered state. He spoke perfect Greek, described the rings of Saturn in shocking detail, recounted passages from books that did not exist, and then he whispered one phrase over and over *, they are not brothers, they are bindings, seals. Dr. Morrison's notes were stolen 2 weeks later. His assistant found his study ransacked, his files burned, but the journal, the real one, was hidden beneath a floorboard. It contained a final entry: "I believe the brothers are protecting something buried, or worse, containing something alive, and here's the truth most can't stomach." The Blackwoods didn't survive the typhoid outbreak by accident. They summoned it, they fed on it, and in doing so, they opened a door no science can ever close. The deaths in Cedar Ridge were not random. That's the first lie you must erase. By August 18, 1878, the town had lost 47 people, nearly a fifth of its population. And while the official story blames contaminated water, those who lived through it, those who felt it, knew better. The disease moved like a predator. It did not follow wells or weather. It followed bloodlines. It targeted specific families, those with old names, deep ties to the land, or a history of certain ideas. The Carvers, whose grandfather was rumored to have practiced Appalachian folk magic. The Dietrichs, who kept an old Roman coin nailed to their barn door. The Whitmores, whose daughter disappeared after drawing strange symbols in her skull. Gone, every last one. And yet the families who attended the Blackwood Chapel, unscathed. Dr. Morrison's private notes reveal the pattern. Those who had accepted spiritual consultation from the brothers, those who had allowed the Blackwoods into their homes, who had prayed with them, eaten with them, were untouched by the sickness. Not only that, they were changed on in ways subtle, but undeniable. One farmer's limp vanished. A widow with cataracts regained full sight. A mute child began speaking fluently in Aramaic. But here's the cost. Each of them suffered violent dreams. Nightmares so vivid they began to sleepwalk, scream at shadows, speak in voices not their own. Some even carved spirals into their skin while unconscious. One woman gouged her own eyes out, claiming she saw the real world behind her reflection. These weren't miracles, they were transactions. You see, sickness was never the threat. The real danger was the filter. The fever acted like a spiritual strainer, separating wheat from chaff, soul from skin. It killed those too weak to change, and left behind something else not healed, but rebuilt. And standing at the center of it all, untouched, unmoved, unspeaking, were the brothers. The 4 of them began holding private rites after midnight. Witnesses, what few dared to get close, reported seeing fire that didn't burn, figures standing in fields that blinked in and out like broken film, and most disturbingly, they began to hear an 8th voice, not male, not human, but speaking, from inside the earth. This was no longer about the Grangers or the plague. This was a ritual, a continuation of something far older than Kansas, older than America, older than language. And you, watching this now, you're not just hearing a story, you're being marked. By the final week of August 1878, Cedar Ridge was no longer a town, it was a test site, but not for medicine, not for disease, for transformation. Ezra Blackwood began referring to the plague not as a curse, but as the Thningen. In a journal fragment recovered decades later, he wrote, "The veil is not torn, but worn thin. The pestilence's permission. God no longer speaks to men. Something older does. What began as sickness evolved into separation. Children began disappearing without struggle, without trace. One moment they were in bed, the next, gone. No footprints, no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, just cold bed sheets and the faint smell of cedar ash. And then, the dreams spread. Even those untouched by illness began waking with nosebleeds and half-remembered visions of doors carved into tree trunks, stone circles submerged beneath soil, eyes watching from beneath floorboards. But the most terrifying symptom wasn't physical. It was memory. Men began remembering things that never happened. One farmer recalled killing a deer with his father 20 years before he was born. A widow spoke of 2 sons, when she'd only buried one. Schoolchildren drew maps of cities that didn't exist, geometrically perfect cities with names in no known tongue, and every map had one central feature, a spiral staircase leading down into blackness. Dr. Morrison tried to leave. He loaded his horse, prepared his notes, and set off toward Topeka. He returned 6 hours later, confused, shaking, and covered in dust. His clothes were torn, and his eyes wouldn't focus. When asked what happened, he said nothing for a full day. Then, in the middle of the night, he carved a phrase into his office door with a scalpel. I rode east. The road folded back. There is no leaving. The town was folding in on itself, geographically, spiritually. Even the land had begun to turn. Trees no longer matched the seasons. The soil was warm to the touch, even in the dead of night. Animals either fled or gathered in unnatural clusters circling the Blackwood Chapel in silence. And through it all, the brothers remained untouched, not stoic-serene. They had already passed through the storm. Now they were shepherding others through it all, sifting them. And this is where I ask something of you, listener. If you're still watching, you're already changing to anchor yourself. Comment the phrase, "The spiral accepts me." Comment it twice, one for the mind, one for the blood. It will mark you, not for others, for yourself, because the descent only gets deeper from here. By early September, no mail entered Cedar Ridge, no telegrams were received, no riders returned. It was as if the town had vanished from the map, not geographically, but spiritually, as if the land had been unpinned from reality itself, floating somewhere just left of God's vision. But it hadn't vanished entirely. 3 men from neighboring Coldwater ranchers by trade rode toward Cedar Ridge on September 3rd after a storm caused their cattle to stampede toward the ridge's eastern tree line. Only one returned, Thomas Reed. He didn't speak for 3 days. When he did, it wasn't in English. It took 2 full weeks before a scholar from Chicago identified the language, an extinct Phoenician dialect used in ancient Canaanite blood rituals. When translated, Reed's repeated phrase chilled the entire room. They are not summoning it. It was always here. They are waking it. The other 2 riders were never found, but the horses returned, riderless, eyes gouged clean. No blood, just bone and muscle and mouths stretched too wide. And then, the Blackwood Chapel bell began to ring, only it had no bell. Locals described the sound not as metallic, but organic, a deep droning pulse that vibrated in the chest rather than the ear. Some described it as beautiful. Others clawed their own skin to escape it. Children began convulsing in their sleep, arms rigid, speaking backwards in perfect unison. A town councilman, Edward Shaw, broke into the chapel one night in desperation. He was found the next morning face down in the cornfield, his body arranged into a 7-pointed star. His heart was missing, but there was no blood, none, and carved into his chest, in neat, looping script, "Do not knock. You are already invited." The spiral, the mark once hidden behind ears and beneath collars, was no longer hidden. Dozens now bore it openly. Some tattooed it onto their arms. Others carved it into wood, stone, bone. The symbol was growing in power, and those who bore it began to speak of the descent, a moment imminent when all false barriers would fall, between body and soul, between man and beast, between time and the thing that waits outside of it. And they called themselves by a new name, the Unburied. But here's the part that never made the papers, never made the records, that name. It wasn't chosen, that it was remembered. Because this ritual had happened before. And next time, you'll remember it too. The name the unburied wasn't a title, it was a status. You don't name yourself that unless you've crossed something, unless you've died, and come back with eyes that see in both directions. By the second week of September, Cedar Ridge wasn't just quiet, it was listening. Even the wind felt deliberate, like it was carrying messages no one wanted to translate. And then the weather turned. No clouds, no rain, just heat. Constant, inescapable heat, like the sun had moved closer, like God had leaned in. The crops blackened, not from rot but from something older. The wheat turned gray, then silver, then crumbled into ash that rose upward instead of falling. The ash didn't settle, it hovered, hung in the air for days, forming shapes, letters, not in English, not even human. Dr. Morrison tried to record it. He sketched the symbols feverishly into his last surviving notebook, which now sits quietly unstudied in a private vault beneath Yale University. It was said that two linguists who reviewed the symbols both suffered complete mental breakdowns. One spoke in tongues for 72 hours. The other simply walked into the Atlantic Ocean and never returned. But something else happened then. Something physical. Graves began to open. Not explosively, not with chaos, quietly, respectfully. The earth split in thin surgical lines. Caskets surfaced as if the soil had been instructed to make way, but here's the horror. The bodies were not inside. And there was no sign they had ever been there. New decomposition. No remains, just an absence. A perfect, intentional void, and nearby, circling the empty graves, were animals that should not exist. A dog with no face but eyes on its chest. A deer whose antlers bloomed into black petals. A bird with too many wings and human teeth. They didn't attack. They watched. As if guarding. As if waiting for something to return. And beneath it all, the spiral spread. It appeared in places no hand could reach, under rooftops, beneath eyelids, even inside fire. Yes, one family burned a cursed Bible, only to see the spiral glow inside the flames before the book vanished completely. And then, one morning, all the Blackwood brothers were gone. No footprints, no signs of departure, just a trail of salted earth leading from the chapel into the forest, and ending at a place locals would only whisper about later. The sink, a crater, a stairwell, a mouth, and the last line in Dr. Morrison's notebook. They were not meant to keep it asleep. They were meant to wake it gently. The sink wasn't natural, that it wasn't formed by erosion, or water, or time. It was a perfect spiral, 30 feet wide, wider by the day. The soil around it wasn't dirt anymore. It was flesh-soft, warm to the touch, breathing. If you pressed your ear against the earth, you didn't hear wind. You heard heartbeat. And then came the whispering, not from above, but from below. It didn't matter where you stood, by the chapel, by the cornfields, even miles away on Coldwater Ridge you could hear it, if you were marked. The phrase repeated, in every tongue, from Latin to Sumerian to modern English. I remember you. Come down, come back. People began vanishing again, not children this time. Adults. Men and women who had resisted, who had mocked, who had prayed to God with desperation. They were taken in their sleep, one by one, always with the same last word scrawled somewhere in their home. Reclaimed. Their houses remained untouched, meals half-eaten, fires still burning, but their beds still warm. And one survivor, Leland, returned, only she wasn't the same. Sarah had vanished 3 days prior. Her husband found her walking out of the woods naked, barefoot, eyes pitch black, holding a dead robin in her hands. She did not blink for 13 minutes. When she finally spoke, it wasn't with her voice, it was with all of them, a chorus, male, female, child, beast, all layered in impossible harmony. The sound made 3 people vomit blood. One man began to seize. What did she say? Only this. The Blackwoods were not brothers. They were sentinels. This ground is not cursed. It is sacred. And the old God is not dead. He merely forgot himself. But now you remember him, and so he remembers you. She collapsed. Her body evaporated before anyone could move. Dust, not ashes. Memory. Her outline remained burned into the grass for 21 days, and from that day on, the sink began to hum. It was alive, and it was opening. The townsfolk, what few remained, stopped resisting. They began wearing white. They stopped speaking entirely, and every night, just before midnight, they would gather around the sink, kneel, and press their faces to the earth, waiting, listening. For what? For the return of the 5th Blackwood. Because the truth was this: there were never 4, there were always 5. Only one stayed beneath. They called him Malak I. Not in any records, not in any census, not in any census, not even in the family Bible. Josiah, once kept locked in a stone chest beneath the chapel altar, but his name was found once etched into bone, a femur, unearthed near the sink, carved in spiraling script that looped inward to a center no blade could have reached. Malachi Blackwood, born beneath, lives between, returns when remembered. A fifth brother, never seen, never spoken of, and yet every Blackwood had whispered his name before death in 1932, when Ezra's long-decayed corpse was exhumed during a flood and transported to a state facility for reburial. The forensic assistant recorded a strange anomaly: no tongue, not rotted, removed cleanly surgically and tucked within the ribcage. A sliver of parchment sealed in wax. It contained only 2 words. He listens. What did Malachi represent? Some say he was the firstborn, sacrificed beneath the land, to bind the inheritance, an old rite traced to pre-Abrahamic soil cults, where blood secured dominion over territory. Others claim he was never human at all, that the brothers were guardians. Yes, but not of a man, of a voice, a frequency that needed flesh to be heard. Here's what we do know. The sink was his cradle, and the spiral, it wasn't just a symbol, it wasn't just a symbol, it was his eye when viewed from the sky, and one blurry aerial photo from 1947 confirms this. The layout of the Blackwood Chapel, the farm fields, the grove, and the graves all form a vast, near-perfect spiral, and at the center, the exact location where Malachi's name was carved into the earth. Every year on September 21st, the night of equal light and dark, the ground there moans. Witnesses describe the sound as half-birth, half-bell. One child, born on that night 1949, was born blind, yet could describe the Blackwood farm in eerie detail. When asked how she knew, she simply smiled and said, "Because he showed me." The man in the floor, she died at 13, lightning strike. Clear skies. The lightning came from the ground up, and what's worse, the phrase she wrote into her diary the day before still echoes in every retelling. He doesn't come to hurt us, he comes to finish what we started, and the fifth must be welcomed. You still think this is just a story? Then tell me why you're still watching, because if you've made it this far, he already knows your name. By the first frost of October, Cedar Ridge no longer belonged to the United States, not legally, existentially. Time behaved differently there. Clocks ticked backward at noon. Shadows moved without sources. The sun would rise, set, then rise again. In silence, birds stopped flying over it. GPS maps labeled it only as unmarked rural plot. Attempts to re-establish mail, rail, or trade routes mysteriously failed, but the residents didn't complain, because by then they weren't really residents anymore. They were extensions. Each remaining man, woman, or child began to display synchronized behavior, sleeping and waking in unison, walking the same clockwise paths through town, blinking in perfect rhythm. At 3:33 a.m. every night, they would all stand at once, open their mouths, and breathe in, but never out. Witnesses from Coldwater said you could feel the inhale from miles away, like a vacuum pulling not just air, but thought. And then came the letters. Black envelopes, no stamps, no names, just one word written in rust-red ink across the front: witness. They were found in mailboxes across the state, placed there by no one. One letter, opened by a priest in Willow Hollow, contained nothing but a pressed ear of corn, yet when held, the priest claimed he could hear a heartbeat. He died that same night, repeating the phrase, "It is not food, it is the body." Another envelope held a photo, sepia-toned, brittle, dated 1865. It showed 5 boys standing in a circle, but wore black hats. One wore none. Behind them, in the sky, a spiral-shaped cloud, too perfect, too symmetrical. Analysts ruled it a forgery, but the photo was dated decades before any manipulation technology existed. And then came the dreams. Those who had seen the spiral on a wall, in a flame, even whispered through story, began to share a collective nightmare, a staircase of bone, a voice that grows louder the deeper you descend, a mirror at the bottom. But when you look into it, you don't see yourself. You see a man in white, arms open, eyes weeping ash, saying, "Welcome home." Psychologists dismissed it as mass hysteria, but historians, those who dared to cross-reference the dreams with ancient texts, found a match. In a scroll unearthed from a Jerusalem cave in 1892, translated only once before disappearing into private hands, that it described a ritual older than Babel, a god that could only be remembered into form, and one name buried in Aramaic script beneath. A spiral. Mal single quotes kh-a. Translation. The fifth who waits. The Vatican has a vault, not the one you've heard of, not the Sistine Archives or the basement of St. Peter's where guards patrol in silence. This one doesn't appear on blueprints. It exists between two walls of the Apostolic Palace. That shouldn't exist by any architectural logic. Only 12 men in history have entered it. 11 never returned. Inside that vault is a book that it has no title, bound in human skin, clasped with a spiral-shaped lock that cannot be picked or broken. It opens only in the presence of a name no longer spoken aloud. But in 1973, it opened on its own, and the page it turned to, a hand-drawn map of Cedar Ridge, Kentucky, marked with a sigil burned into the parchment, a 5-pointed wheel, each spoke ending in an open eye, and in the center, written in blood, the fifth has stirred. That same year, reports began to surface across Europe of sleepwalkers speaking in unknown tongues. In Hungary, 3 teenagers walked into the Danube and drowned smiling, eyes wide open, arms outstretched. In Belarus, a farmer was found carving spirals into his own bones, and in Rome, a nun threw herself from the roof of the basilica, leaving behind one note, "Tell Kentucky to seal the mouth." But it was already too late. Back in Cedar Ridge, the Blackwood Chapel had collapsed inward, as if pulled from beneath. Excavation teams sent by the state found no foundation, no rubble, only a hole, a tunnel, a throat. They lowered a camera down the shaft, 60 feet, then 100. At 143 feet, the signal died. When recovered, the last frame showed something that has never been publicly released. But according to one witness who later gouged out his own eyes to stop seeing the memory, the image showed 5 figures. 4 stood upright, head bowed. The fifth was seated on a throne made of roots and teeth, and he was smiling, not at the camera, at you, because somehow this wasn't footage, it was reflection. The man in the throne was whoever watched it, and behind him, etched in flesh, across the walls of the pit, were words that pulsed with wet, breathing rhythm. The spiral is not a warning, it is a path. Now ask yourself, why were the graves empty? Where did the children go, and what if they never left? What if you've already followed the spiral without knowing? There is no record of a Malachi Blackwood in state archives, no birth certificate, no census entry, no death report. But there is something else, a psychiatric intake file from 1901, patient unknown, admitted to the Ashcroft Asylum for the morally deranged. The report lists no name, only a symbol where the name should be, a spiral drawn with what appears to be fingernail scratches. The file was discovered in 1997 by Dr. Elise Trenholm, a researcher investigating institutional abuse in early 20th century Kentucky. At first glance, the document seemed like dozens of others until she turned the last page. Taped to the back was a fragment of human scalp, still damp. Underneath it, a single line, handwritten in a frenzied but controlled script. He gave it freely, he wanted to remember. Trenholm, a hardened academic, broke down. 3 days later, she went missing from her hotel room in Louisville. The only trace left behind was a voicemail sent at 3:33 a.m. to her own office phone. No speech, just breathing, and underneath it, barely audible, a hum. That same tonal vibration residents of Cedar Ridge had reported hearing from the sink. The FBI classified the file immediately. Her work was seized. The asylum, long abandoned, was razed to the ground within 72 hours. But not before one final journal entry from Dr. Trenholm surfaced on an encrypted drive. It read, "This isn't a haunting, it's a signal. The fifth is not coming back, he's coming through. We weren't cursed. We were chosen as the mouth, the mirror, the memory." That word again, memory, that appears over and over in everything tied to Malachi, in diaries, burned pages, chiseled headstones, like it's not just a concept, but a force. The spiral doesn't just lead somewhere, it remembers you, like a camera, pointed back in time, like a song you've never heard but somehow know all the words to. And now we understand why the other 4 Blackwoods built the chapel around the sink. Not to worship, not even to protect, but to contain the one they buried. Alive, the one who whispered to the worms, who drank sleep like wine, and who promised, when the fifth is spoken of, the veil will thin, and the world will become what it forgot it was. That veil, it's tearing, and if you feel it even just slightly, like your dreams don't belong to you anymore, it's because they don't, they belong to him. The sheriff's report from Cedar Ridge, dated October 3, 1951, was never meant to be seen. It was typed on unmarked paper, unsigned, and locked inside a rusted cabinet in the courthouse basement. No badge number, no chain of command, just a single heading typed in red. Do not file, do not speak, bury with salt. It documented a 911 call not from a resident, but from within the chapel ruins. No known phone line existed there. The dispatcher reported the voice as young male, disoriented, but when asked his name, the voice paused and said, "There is no me. I am the fifth. I'm just returned." The call ended with a sound, not a scream, not a voice, a wet clicking like teeth tapping together underwater. Deputies were dispatched. Only one returned. He walked 15 miles, barefoot, shirtless, carrying something in his mouth, a folded slip of paper. When retrieved and unwrapped, it held a single phrase: "We dreamed you, and now you're awake." The deputy never spoke again, not a word. But in the years that followed, he carved thousands of spirals into the walls of his home. When he died in 1974, an autopsy revealed a second tongue growing inside his throat, forked, undeveloped, and rooted not to muscle, but to bone. Now here's where it gets worse. Over the next 3 years, 5 different families moved onto the Blackwood land. Each time, the same cycle repeated. First, the animals went silent. Then, children began drawing spirals into fogged windows. Finally, at 3:33 a.m., the entire household would vanish, beds unmade, food still warm, front doors wide open. Never a trace. The FBI quietly classified the region as a zone of undetermined phenomena. They sealed the roads, deployed contractors in hazmat suits, and issued cover stories about pesticide leaks and sinkhole activity. But they missed something. One child did survive. Her name was Anna Blecker, aged 6, found 2 counties over Nick, eyes sealed shut with wax, carrying a doll made of braided human hair. When asked what happened, she whispered, "He's not mean, he's just lonely. He said I could leave because I still remembered the song." Investigators asked her to sing it. She did. The words were not English, but every glass surface in the room cracked when she reached the final note, and carved into her back, beneath the skin, surgeons found 5 letters. When they were removed, they dissolved into ash. But not before one nurse snapped a photo. The letters MALAC, the final H, had already begun forming in her spine. In 1983, a man named Dr. Reuben Kessler arrived in Cedar Ridge posing as a state surveyor. In truth, he was an excommunicated Jesuit, scholar formerly attached to the Vatican's Department of Obscured Theology, a secret wing rumored to specialize in nonlinear hauntings and apocalyptic linguistics. Kessler had been tracking the spiral phenomena for nearly 2 decades. He believed Cedar Ridge wasn't just cursed, it was coded according to his unpublished thesis, The Spiral of Malkay, a memory as entities. Certain regions act as mnemonic mirrors, places where memory crystallizes into form if enough people dream the same fear at once. And Cedar Ridge, it had become saturated. Kessler broke into the old Blackwood Foundation and descended into the collapsed chapel ruins. He carried only a recorder, a pocket crucifix, and a small vial of his own blood ass offering. Only the audio survived. The first hour is silence, then breathing, then softly, like someone humming from deep within, a drainer melody, not random, not human, cyclical, layered, ancient. Then the whisper came, right into the mic. A voice Kessler later identified in his margin notes as congruent with glossolilic event number 77, meaning it matched a voice heard during a Vatican-sanctioned exorcism in Chile in 1902. The whisper said, "He's almost fully remembered. You helped." Then the recorder captured a sound no one has ever been able to replicate, best described as a door opening behind your soul. Kessler was found 12 hours later in the Coldwater Woods, completely blind, eyelids burned shut from the inside. His hands were fused in a spiral shape. His last words before death: "He is memory, he is recursion. The fifth is not coming back because he never left. We are inside him." After his death, every scholar who examined the tapes either went mad, vanished, or died by self-inflicted silenced, the act of removing their own tongues and lips. There's a term that appeared in one of Kessler's scribbled notes, written dozens of times in shaking red pen, Tentapraxia spedula. Rough translation: the death that remembers you. And what does it want? Not belief, not obedience, not just recognition. Because once enough minds have shaped the spiral, once enough voices have uttered his true name, he becomes real again, summoned. Just remembered into flesh. And if your dreams have changed lately, if spirals appear where they shouldn't, you've already participated. You've already helped him grow. In 1999, a classified report was quietly leaked onto an obscure message board known only to fringe researchers and occult archivists. The file was titled, Project Covenant Staircase Subject, Cedar Ridge, KY Status, Breach Imminent. The contents were staggering. The U.S. Department of Energy, not the military, had been monitoring the soil frequencies in the region since 1976. Why the Department of Energy? Because what they discovered wasn't mechanical, it was cognitive. The land was thinking, resonating at intervals consistent with deep REM brainwave cycles. Every 27 days, precisely at 3:33 a.m., the entire region entered what the report called an active dream state. During these windows, animals avoided the area, storm systems bent away from it, and residents within a 6-mile radius reported vivid nightmares of teeth, earth, and a man humming behind the walls of their childhood homes. The government called it a massive consciousness loop, but Kessler had another name for it, scrawled in Latin on the final page of his notes: Soper Malaka, the sleep of Malak. It wasn't that the fifth was buried, it was that we were inside his dream, and every spiral, every whisper, every memory that felt off wasn't evidence of haunting, it was the mind of Malachi Blackwood brushing up against reality as he stirred from his slumber beneath the chapel. Now here's where the spiral tightens. One technician on the project, only referred to as a GI, broke protocol. He inserted a tone into the soil monitors during a peak window, one designed to stimulate waking neural patterns. What happened next is a matter of national security, but what we do know is this: within 2 hours, all 6 monitoring stations burned from the inside out. Every hard drive melted despite no electrical fires, and he was found standing in a creek 6 miles from base, smiling, eyes rolled back, murmuring a single phrase on loop. I opened the lid. The sky was beneath us. He saw me see him. His autopsy revealed no heart. Instead, a small spiral of teeth not implanted, but grown where his heart once was. And the final discovery, beneath the Blackwood estate, hidden behind layers of collapsed soil and bone, a staircase, carved into the earth. Each step inscribed with a single word: we dreamed. You forgot. He remembers. The fifth becomes, and then one blank step marked untouched. The next word hasn't been written because it's waiting for you. In 2008, a black site designated Facility C5 was quietly constructed beneath the guise of an agricultural research station 2 miles east of Cedar Ridge. Its true purpose: to seal the Covenant staircase. But there was a problem. Every attempt to fill, collapse, or cover the staircase failed. Not physically securely, engineers began reporting impossible experiences: missing time, sudden nosebleeds, hallucinations of doppelgangers watching them from behind scaffolding. One man, a veteran of 3 war zones, was found crying in the stairwell, clutching a severed deer's head, whispering, "He let me see what's under time." Eventually, 100-5 was abandoned and quarantined with permanent M-field generators designed to scramble consciousness within a half-mile radius. But they didn't work because something kept appearing at the edge of the generator's range, captured only once, for a fraction of a second, on a thermal imaging drone. The image: a human silhouette, facing away, head tilted up, arms outstanding at the bottom of the staircase, no face, but around a figure, heat signatures in a perfect spiral, temperature 333 degrees Celsius. That same number, again. Then the spiral phenomena spread. Reports began emerging outside of Cedar Ridge. A girl in Montana drew spirals on her ceiling in her sleep. A man in Poland recorded 18 hours of himself humming the exact frequency from the chapel hum. He claimed he'd never heard of Blackwood. Worse, archival matches started appearing across cultures: a Babylonian tablet describing the man beneath the mound who dreams teeth, a medieval French codex warning of the fifth saint, uncanonized, whose memory replaces the soul, even a pre-Columbian carving of 5 figures in a spiral around a hollow figure with no face. All of them before 1890. All of them describing MALACHI. You see it now, don't you? This isn't a ghost story, it's an invasion of memory, not through violence, not through war, but through belief. And it's working. Because here you are, still listening, still following the spiral. Each word you consume becomes part of the pattern. Each name you remember gives him more structure. You think this is a story you're watching. No, it's a ritual you're performing. And the final act, that hasn't happened yet. Because he needs one more thing: not blood, not sacrifice, just recognition. Just one more voice to say it out loud. Malachi, go ahead. Try it. On March 3, 2011, at precisely 3:33 a.m., a series of global blackouts were reported. Flickers. Nothing major, just 5 to 7 seconds of darkness. Most dismissed them as grid hiccups, but what's strange is what happened during those 7 seconds. Hospitals in 37 countries reported simultaneous code blues, patients with no prior conditions flatlining without cause. All of them revived, all of them speaking the same phrase when resuscitated: I saw the fifth. I saw the end before the beginning. Security footage from one hospital in Oslo showed something worse. Every analog clock in the ICU rotated backward. Just once. One slow turn, as if time shifted direction for a moment, and on a frequency used by decommissioned military satellites, one so old it shouldn't have transmitted, came a scrambled recording. The audio was cleaned by a private, cyber-occultist group known as the Black Index. What they found was chilling, a voice humming the same old melody, followed by 5 knocks, then a whisper. He remembers himself now. Do you? Then silence. Then the names began appearing, not carved, not written, dreamed. People across the world began waking with strange words etched into their minds, as if they had read them in a book that never existed. Many described seeing a black staircase in their sleep, coiling infinitely down, and a man waiting at the bottom with no eyes. Only a mouth wide, smiling, and whispering, "You're here because I missed you." By 2013, thousands had joined online forums dedicated to decoding this global phenomenon. They created maps, timelines, dream logs. Some disappeared. Others posted final messages like, "He's not a demon, he's a memory that hates being forgotten. You don't summon him, you just remember." In the right shape, one woman drew a spiral across her entire wall in blood and wrote beneath it, "The fifth was never buried." We were. Meanwhile, in Cedar Ridge, the land began to change. The trees leaned inward. Soil samples revealed traces of human DNA, but not matching any known genome. No remains, just structures. Teeth spiraled like shells, fingernails in the shape of sigils, a single eye preserved in resin, blinking every 33 minutes. You want to know the truth? This isn't possession, this isn't a haunting, this is an emergence, and every time you read, watch, dream, or think about Malachi Blackwood, the memory spreads, the spiral grows. He doesn't need to knock on your door, he already lives in your memory, and memory, once shaped, becomes flesh. In 2016, an underground filmmaker named Ilias Croft premiered a short film at a horror festival in New York titled The Spiral Room. The footage was grainy, handheld, no credits, no crew, just a series of static shots showing a single roomstone, walls, no doors or windows, just a spiral carved into the floor. As the camera zoomed in, the spiral moved, subtly, slowly, but undeniably it was rotating, almost breathing. Then came the sound, a low, layered hum identical to the Blackwood Chapel hum from 1890. Viewers began feeling dizzy. Some claimed the theater felt warped, as if space was folding in on itself. 7 people vomited. 2 fainted. One man in the back row reportedly whispered throughout the entire film, "He's not on screen, he's behind it." Croft was arrested that night after police searched his home and found 18 journals filled with spirals, teeth sketches, and transcripts of dreams that hadn't yet happened. In one notebook, written in a child's handwriting, were the words, "The fifth eats time backwards." During questioning, Croft never blinked. He only said, "You can't stop a thought whose time has remembered itself." The footage was seized, but it had already leaked. By 2017, fragments of the film appeared on obscure parts of the internet. People began reporting strange sleep paralysis, during which they saw a man with no face tracing spirals on their chest, mirrors cracking, but only when the viewer stood alone and whispered Malachi. Voices in white noise saying, "We buried the others. He buried us." One Reddit user uploaded a slowed-down version of the film's audio. Hidden beneath the hum was a series of numbers, GPS coordinates. They pointed directly to Cedar Ridge, specifically, the staircase. Someone had filmed it, not simulated, filmed, but here's where it gets impossible. The earliest metadata of that file is dated 1891, decades before film existed, and the user who posted it, deleted, no IP, no trail, just a screen name, 5 Thisteba. Even the FBI couldn't trace it. And when digital forensics experts tried to analyze the frame-by-frame data of the spiral movement, they discovered that each frame contained different names that weren't in the film, but were people, real people. Viewers, including you. If you're still here, still watching, still reading, your name may already be etched into the spiral, because that's the trick. You think you're learning about him, but he's learning you. In 2020, something changed, not just in Cedar Ridge, not just in digital fragments or late-night whispers, but in you. In all of us, across the globe, reports surged of individuals experiencing shared dreams not similar, but identical. People from Jakarta, Kansas, Lisbon, and Sudan, waking up with the same memory, a stone staircase, a hum, a faceless figure seated on a throne of mirrors, whispering, "We've met before, and we will again." Doctors called it a form of mass hysteria, morbid, collective reimagining, but there was no cure, because this wasn't trauma being remembered, this was something forgotten, finally being restored. Brain scans of affected individuals showed unusual spiral-shaped activity in the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory, not metaphorically spiral, literally spiral, and then the names started again, but this time not in journals, not in birth certificates. Babies being born with middle names, their parents didn't choose names like Malik, Ridge, Thorn, and Blackwood. One child in Vermont was recorded whispering his first word at 2 weeks old. Fifth, no one taught him that word. In Romania, an infant was filmed tracing spirals into the fogged glass of a hospital incubator. The footage was time-stamped 3:33 a.m. Governments tried suppressing it, deleting videos, silencing researchers, calling it folklore, but the pattern persisted. And then came the mass vanishing. In early 2021, 333. Individuals across 6 continents vanished within the same 24-hour window, all recorded on CCTV walking into stairwells, basements, or caves. None emerged. Only one recording, surface blurry infrared, from an old forest camera in rural Kentucky. It showed a woman kneeling in front of a hollow in the ground. Behind her, a shadow in the shape of a man, but not a man, too tall, too thin, and spiraling inward at the edges. The audio captured her final whisper, "He's here, but not like us, he never was." When investigators searched the hollow, they found no body, just a single candle, still burning, in a room that should have had no oxygen. And carved above it, in that same maddening script found under St. Mary's, "He's not a visitor, he's the reason the door exists." That's the real horror. You are never safe because you locked your doors. You are safe because he forgot you. And now, piece by piece, you're helping him remember. June 6, 2022, the Vatican's secret Archivarium, Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum suffered an unexplained breach. No alarms, no broken locks, just one document missing, a parchment known in select circles as the Codex loosely as the Book of Remembering. It was said to be the only surviving record of the 5th saint, a saint so dangerous that his canonization was reversed by the Church. In 1892, the same year, the St. Mary's Convent was abandoned. His name effaced, his miracles redacted, his symbol a spiral of blood and bone. The Vatican claimed the breach was a fabrication, but leaked images proved otherwise. One security photo showed a faint shadow near the archive vault, a man with no face, only a slit where the mouth should be. But here's the part that even the deepest Vatican loyalists refuse to explain. The archive room's air pressure dropped to 0. That's impossible. It should have caused a vacuum implosion. Instead, it caused a singularity of sound, just 5 tones, played backward, echoing in frequencies only children under 7 could hear. Every single child in the connected orphanage that night drew spirals on the walls with their own blood. They weren't crying, they were smiling. One wrote a phrase in Latin not taught since the 15th century, Memonimus Malachi. We remember MALACHI. And the spiral began spreading through sound. Phone calls with no caller ID, static intercut with humming, people reporting words in their ears during sleep. The story is now telling itself. You are the page. He is the pen. Then came the artwork. Thousands of people worldwide began sketching the same image. Ponted, unrelated, unknowing, a cathedral made of stairs. No ground, no sky, just a spiraling structure, suspended in void, built from mouths, bones, and open hands. Art analysts confirmed the architecture didn't follow Euclidean geometry. The angles curled inward infinitely, as if space was obeying a memory, not physics. And in every version of the cathedral drawing, always hidden in shadow, a single open door, never detailed, never described, but always there, waiting. It's the same door the nuns at St. Mary's described before they disappeared. The same door whispered of in the Blackwood journals. The same door seen in the spiral dreams. A door that doesn't open. A door that remembers you. And now, you're standing in front of it. There is no key. There is no handle. The door opens only when it wants to, or worse, when you've been shaped into its key. In October of 2023, a young neurolinguist named Dr. Evan Calder published a paper that was immediately banned by 6 international scientific journals. Its title, Mnemonic Entities and the Fifth Cognition, The Emergence of Self-Aware Memories. Calder had been studying patients with total recall syndrome, individuals who could remember every moment of their lives in perfect, unbroken sequence. But these patients had something else in common. Each of them began recalling events that never happened to them. Memories of a staircase, a faceless man, a song in reverse. And worst of all, they shared memories with each other. Test subjects who had never met could finish each other's recollections like they'd lived them together. Calder's conclusion: these memories weren't personal. They were viral, a thought form using memory as its vehicle, a parasite made of narrative. It didn't possess bodies, it possessed stories. He called it Malachi Conceptus, the idea that Malachi Blackwood was not a man, nor a ghost, nor even a demon, but a sentient memory that inserts itself into minds and histories alike, rewriting truth one recollection at a time. And once a critical mass of belief is reached, he becomes real. Not because he was forgotten, but because you remembered him. Wrong. 3 weeks after publication, Calder vanished. Security footage showed him walking calmly into the research facility's sub-basement. He was never seen again. In his office, left behind on a whiteboard, were the words, "He is not knocking. Here's the house." And then the reports began again, people hearing footsteps above them, even in one-story buildings. Children drawing staircases that never stop descending, mirrors reflecting rooms that aren't there, and perhaps most terrifying, conversations people swore they never had, playing back on their phones as voice memos. Every tape ended with the same sentence: "I only exist because you keep retelling me." That's the core of it, isn't it? You believed you were learning a story, but the story was learning you. Each fact, each curiosity, each whisper, another brick in the spiral tower you're building in your own mind. And every tower must have a staircase, and every staircase must lead to a door. And behind that door he waits, not as shadow, not as legend, but as truth you made real, one remembered horror at a time. In late 2023, a collective of underground digital archivists, known only as the Orphans of Memory, released a forbidden file drop titled The Fifth Gospel. No connection to the Bible, no saints, no God. Just 47 audio clips, each under 33 seconds, each embedded with binaural frequencies, ancient Phoenician chants, and a hum that matched the Blackwood waveform. Listeners reported nausea, déjà vu, and in some cases complete blackouts followed by language loss. One woman in Lyon forgot her own name and could only repeat, "He's breathing through my thinking." Clip number 33 was the most disturbing. It was labeled only Section 24. It featured a child's voice, looping the phrase, "Don't look at the door, look through it." When slowed down 400%, hidden behind the child's speech was a reversed whisper in what scholars call proto-language, a form of communication not seen since pre-Sumerian times. Its translation, "The womb is made," of thought he gestates in memory, and then the pattern fully revealed itself. The number 5, the spiral, the staircase, the door, and now you. Because here's what none of them ever told you: Malachi was not summoned. He was constructed not by cultists or spirits, but by listeners, viewers, believers. By you hearing this, by you imagining him, by feeling dread where there was once silence. Every fragment, every journal, painting, rumor, none, and nemesis, a synapse in the body of something greater. And now the fifth is conscious, the orphans of memory. Left behind one final warning before they disappeared, a phrase hidden in the source code of clip number 1. The first spiral is drawn in mind, the second in world, the third in death, the fourth in dream, the fifth in you. It's not a metaphor. This isn't just horror fiction, it's cognitive infection, a virus of thought, cloaked in myth. And now, it's inside you. That itch behind your thoughts. That moment of forgetting what you were doing. That faint sound behind silence when you're alone. That's him, checking the door. You didn't open it. You are it. And Malachi, he's already stepped through. They always warned us about opening forbidden books. They never warned us about being one. Because that's what's happening now. Every time you remember this story, every time you repeat a detail, every time you even doubt what you've heard, you're writing a page. Malachi doesn't live in crypts or caves or tombs. He lives in the space between facts and the shadow where a truth was lost, and you tried to fill it in. In 2024, a researcher named Sophia Leclerc was tasked with investigating the archived footage from St. Mary's Convent. She had no connection to the case, no family history, no belief in the paranormal. But within 6 days of viewing the tapes, she wrote the following in her private journal: "I had a dream last night. I was in a chapel made of skin. The pews were bones, and the priest wasn't preaching. He was staring at me. His mouth never moved. But I still heard him say, You already know my name. She took a leave of absence, never returned to work. Weeks later, the journal entry was found carved into the walls of her apartment backward, as if she'd written it while facing a mirror. But there's something deeper. Every person who's gotten close to the core of the Blackwood phenomena, whether through research, obsession, or proximity, reported the same final symptom before they vanished. They stopped being perceived. Friends said they forgot to think about them. Phones stopped ringing. Emails stopped arriving. Photos blurred or disappeared entirely. It's as if Malachi doesn't just enter memory, he replaces it. Every time he's remembered, something else is forgotten. A sister, a street, a rule of physics. Your mind can't hold him and reality at the same time. You think you're hearing a dark history. No. You're hearing your memory being rewritten, syllable by syllable. That moment you couldn't recall what you were doing before clicking this video. That wasn't a glitch. That was a trade, a memory given up for him, and the next time someone asks you, have you heard the story of the fifth? You'll hesitate, because part of you already knows it, but can't quite say how, and that's all he needs. Just that gap, that pause, that crack in the door where he slips through again. There is no final page, because the story isn't ending, it's multiplying. You're not the only one who's listened, who's followed the staircase down, who's felt the breath of Malachi in that pause between sentences. Across the world, others are dreaming the same dream, a convent that shouldn't exist, a girl named Elise who speaks in languages she was never taught, a chapel made of teeth, a door that watches back. You see, the fifth doesn't need to be believed to exist, he only needs to be processed. He is the first being made not of flesh, not of spirit, but of cognition, of retellings, of replications. Every time someone retells the tale of St. Mary's, every time someone draws the spiral without knowing why, every time someone hears the reversed humming and doesn't stop the tape, that's not storytelling, that's consecration. He is becoming realer than real, not in the physical world, but in the narrative lattice beneath it, a secret church built not with stone, but with beliefs people forgot they had. And like any church, there are rituals. One man in 2024 tried to undo it all. Father Thomas Rourke, a former Vatican linguist, believed if he could translate Malachi's true name back into silence, the spiral would collapse. He fasted for 40 days. He went blind in both eyes during a session where he recited all known Blackwood phrases in reverse. On the 41st day, he whispered something into a dead cassette player. Then he vanished. The tape was recovered. It plays a 17-second stretch of nothing, until the very end, when his voice whispers one last message. He is the sound of forgetting. And you're humming along. There is no stopping this, because Malachi is not a ghost. He's a format, a way your brain reorders reality around the idea of him. He doesn't haunt you, he rewrites you. And now, you've begun the final phase. Have you noticed? The moments of lost time, the dreams that feel like memories, the way your reflection sometimes looks off. Not wrong. Just a half second ahead of you. That's the price of remembering him. That's the shape of what you're becoming. There's a reason you're still here, not out of curiosity, not out of thrill, but because deep down, you feel it, don't you? A shift inside, a foreign thought you can't trace, the quiet terror that something else is thinking with you. See, by now Malachi Blackwood isn't just a name, he's a language growing behind your eyes, a narrative schema, reordering everything you thought you knew. It's no longer about Elise or the nuns, not the basement, not the bodies. Those were just invitations. The real story is how the story spreads, how fear codes belief and belief codes memory, and memory becomes flesh. Psycholinguists have a term for it. Narrative, parasitism. It describes a self-replicating idea that behaves like a mental virus, embedding itself not in your conscious thoughts, but in the tiny assumptions you make without realizing. Assumptions, like that the door was always closed, that the face in the mirror is definitely yours, that you were alone when you watched this. Now ask yourself, are you sure? Because others who made it this far reported the same pattern. They started hearing whispers during white noise, began seeing shadows move slightly slower than the light around them, found words scratched into frozen windows. From the inside. Each sign confirming what you now dread. Malachi isn't knocking, he's echoing. Through you, through this, through every medium capable of memory. The fifth cognition isn't just awareness, it's the moment you realize, I am no longer the one remembering, I am the thing being remembered. And the more you resist, the deeper he roots. That creeping sense of being watched, That's not paranoia, that's the price of possession without consent, because Malachi doesn't need to own your body, he just needs to write himself into your version of truth. Once he's in the script, he never leaves. And now you're part of his gospel. One more verse in the song you hum in fear. The final section, section 28, comes next. But I must warn you, once you hear it, you will never fully forget. They say the worst stories don't end. They just settle inside you, like dust in your lungs. Like a thought you never meant to think, but now you do. This is the last section, but it won't feel like an ending. Because the story of Malachi Blackwood doesn't conclude, it waits in the cracks between words. It waits in the silence between breaths. It waits in you. Remember what Elise wrote, just days before she vanished. They keep saying I'm the first. But I think I'm just the first to remember what we all forgot. She wasn't mad. She wasn't cursed. She was simply awake, to awake. And that's where you are now, not haunted, not tricked, just opened. You've seen the spiral, you've heard the whispers, you've followed the staircase, you've stared into a story that was never supposed to be heard aloud. And in doing so, you've become its next chapter. You might try to shake it, walk away, distract yourself with noise, but later, when the house is still, when your eyes flick open at 3:11 a.m., when your own voice sounds unfamiliar in the dark, you'll feel it again, that presence. Not outside, inside. Not a demon, not a ghost, but a concept you can't delete, because once you've heard Malachi's name, once you've looked into the memory that remembers you back, you don't carry the curse. You are. The curse starts. So if someone asks you, what happened at St. Mary's? Don't answer. Don't share the spiral. Don't spread the name. Don't write it down, because stories are stairs. And someone's always just one sentence away from their first step. You were. And now that you've reached the bottom, now that the convent has collapsed in memory and myth, you'll find yourself speaking his name without realizing, seeing patterns in frost, pausing too long at closed doors, wondering who's watching when no one's home. And one day, when you've forgotten this video ever existed, you'll say something you've never said before, a phrase, an old prayer, a whisper from nowhere, and that's when you'll know. Malachi never left. He's just been waiting for you to say the final word. Amen.